Hey folks, Steve here with another Korea Fire and Ice video. In this video, we'll be starting the game proper with turn 1, which is functionally the last week of June 1950, the start of the scenario. Last video, we did all of the setup, and I kind of explained what the setup really means for the game and is part of the basics. There were a couple of things I left out that I really should have talked about or touched upon quickly, because technically it is a part of setup. So as part of the rest of the prep work of the game, um, I've got my little soy sauce dishes with a variety of counters. So for things like bug out of command, low morale, those sort of status markers. Same thing for the communist version. We've got a cup for our trenches and prepared position markers. And then here I have markers that are for elite units, guard units, penal units, poor units, basically. These can come up when you roll natural ones or natural sixes and tens based on what die you're rolling, where units can, they're basically revealed to have been elite, well-trained, capable folks in that particular unit. So that is not something that comes out of the Snafu Cup, which I'm going to show here in a second. So I think when I first organized my counters, I actually had those elite units in the Snafu Cup, and I had to remove them because I sort of set that up wrong. Caught that. Wait, I do have here in the cup an opaque, I can't see when I'm sticking my hand in and picking it out. These are the Snafu markers. These are things like great leaders or poor leaders or low ammo, out of ammo, low fuel, out of fuel markers that will come up when we have the two sides rolling the same number on a die when conducting combat, and potentially because of a random event and stuff like that. So I'm not sure how much they'll come up. I suspect maybe it really won't be that often that we'll be drawing from the cup for Snafu markers. It just will depend on, I guess the combat results. But that sort of adds a little bit of chaotic factor to the game, where units can become affected by different statuses, even beyond being disrupted or routed or low morale, which will affect their capability. You can also have these sort of random things come up. So while the game has, no combat factors on the units, you can still get a mixture of different statuses and things that can affect, which units are better to be using in a particular situation or whatever, stuff like that. The other cups that we have, I have two, like so. These are for the different combat types. So there's one cup for your deliberate attack or a prepared attack. So whenever you're choosing one of those two combat types, you will pull from this cup. Whichever attack you're choosing to pick, you'll use that side of the counter, and that will show you the details. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute once we start actually conducting combats. And then there's a separate cup for your hasty attacks and meeting engagements. So those are other things that you need to set up. Once you've, in my case here, now that I've sort of organized the game and I've got the counters sort of separated, they'll all eventually go back into little baggies separate from one another. So it's set up to go put those counters together in a cup, but is not part of the just scenario setup instructions. It's something you would do for whichever campaign or I'm sorry, whichever scenario you're actually looking to play. Okay, so according to the scenario rules, this campaign starts with the movement phase of the communist movement phase. Now, I need to kind of bring up our sequence of play because there's a bit of a confusing bit in my mind. So it says the communist movement phase. I take that to mean the strategic movement phase, because that's the only movement phase you have, right? You have an activation phase where you have different things. But the notes in the scenario don't say strategic movement phase, they just say movement phase. So I'm going to make a little bit of a leap and allow the communists to do a strategic move as opposed to just having it be the activation phase. Maybe not a huge deal, but it will help us get HQs and maybe some slightly better positioning. I do have to watch out because as I was, in between the last video and this video, I was cleaning in here and I was rearranging stuff. I was hanging some posters and I might have bumped the table a little bit. So hopefully everyone's in the same place that they're supposed to be in. But what that really means is if we want to move things around a little bit with the units on the board, we can potentially do that if we want to. And it's, I think, a question about what makes sense to do. Before we initiate that, I do want to touch upon one important factor, because this is effectively our opportunity as the North Koreans in their activity phase, or their strategic movement and activity phase. I need to make sure it's clear, like, how much oomph do we really have, and what should we be aiming to do in this turn. Well, the way the game ultimately works is that when you're activating units, you're activating HQs first of all, right? So we have 1, 2, 3 HQs to use. Those HQs are then going to activate 1 to 4 units, at least for now. There are ways to increase that number, but the main thing is we're going to activate up to 4 units when we activate that HQ. When we do that, we're going to end up flipping an HQ to its spent side, and then any units that it activates would also be flipped to their spent side, just to note that those are the units that are acting, and they're going to go do their thing, and by the time you're done acting with them, they will have been spent, right? So you sort of start with that to get them going. Now, there's a mechanism so that when an HQ activation is complete, and you do a whole series of actions within that HQ activation, when that is complete, you have an option. If the HQ did not move at the end of the activation, you can spend some of the supply. So reminder that we have a supply marker here. The North Koreans have 12 supply. We can spend a supply point or we can spend some supply to flip an HQ back to its fresh side, and then either later or immediately activate that HQ again, flipping it back to its spent side, and activating 4 other units to go and do stuff. The one thing that's important to keep in mind in terms of our strategy and how we attack into South Korea is that while HQs can be refreshed via supply points, and we'll have to decide how much supply do we really want to use, units do not become refreshed when doing that. So your sort of ceiling for activity is really going to be based directly on how many units you have and whether or not those units become spent. So if we think through that, right, then it becomes a matter of, well, this guy's going to basically get to do 1 series of actions. All these guys will get to do 1 series of actions. It doesn't matter if we refresh all of our HQs at that point, but if we've activated all of the units at least once, or the once, those units are done. And so the sequence of activities may be very significant. For instance, we may have, if we shuffle our HQs around, and I suspect I may have to do that, we might have an HQ activate this 1 unit by itself to attack here and try to eliminate it or push it out of the way. And then on a subsequent activation, refresh this HQ. Sorry, that's a TV making a sound. I refresh this HQ, and I have this unit take an action. And now that I've cleared the way over here, he can just move all the way up this way. Alternatively, I could activate both of these units and have them both come over here and try to attack. But the thing is, this guy's going to have, he won't get as far if I was trying to send him down this way, because he's going to deal with the Zoc and everything else. So it's the sequencing and how you use supply to refresh your HQs to have the right sequence to do what you want to do, I think, is how to look at it. Now, my problem is I'm not going to know the right way to do this at all. When I look at the map, particularly when I look down here, say, well, there's really no reason these guys are even over here. Like, why? I'm going to capture that town. That's not that valuable to me. There's nothing really worthwhile. So what I suspect I'll need to do is move these guys over here, shift these HQs that were here more like this, and then figure out the right sequence. And you basically, at least the way the current rules read, you can kind of decide along the way which way you want to go. So activate that one HQ, start performing actions, and then when that's done, you basically continue to operate until you are certain that you're done or you've run out of stuff to do. And what's going to be important is the actual refresh phase. So once we have actually done everything and all of our combat units have been flipped to their spent side, the communist player would say, okay, I'm done with my activation phase. We do the communications phase and check to ensure all of our units are in communication. They have a line of communication. And then we have the refresh phase where the units will all flip back to fresh, but the HQs will not. And in fact, they will not do that until basically the next the next communist activation phase or the monthly infrastructure and supply phase. So basically what I could see that meaning, and this is going to go for both sides, and I'm sorry this is such a long intro, but I want to make sure you guys can understand the mechanisms of the game as we go. That's the whole reason I do these in-depth videos. Is that we will perform our actions, we will be flipping HQs, we will be refreshing HQs to get all of our units spent doing as much good things that we want to have happen as possible. We will still want to, even when we get to the end of our activation, if we can, keep our units, our HQs, fresh, because they're going to need to be fresh at the next communist activity to perform actions, essentially. And what may matter is, because when we're done with this turn, the UN isn't going to have a whole lot that they can do. So when the communists are done and the UN does what little things it can do, we'll reach the end of the turn and we'll go back into a monthly phase for July 1950. When we do that, we'll be able to refresh our HQs. And what may be important, and I'll have to look at this more closely, is it cheaper to refresh them during an activation phase, or is it cheaper to refresh them during that monthly phase when you do the infrastructure and supply and where you're able to refresh HQs? So it's that cadence of your units are going to get to refresh when you're all done, but you need to keep them activating until you get what you want done. And then you're going to refresh your HQs to such a degree where it makes sense. This first turn, it doesn't matter as much because we have 12 supply. We're going to use as much supply as we can because it's going to refresh at the end of this turn when we go into July 1950. But once we actually are in July 1950, the really significant thing is we have 4 turns between the next monthly turn and the one that we can refresh all of our HQs. So the difference between turn 1 and turn 2 is at the end of turn 2, it will be more important for the North Koreans to have refreshed their HQs in between week 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 than it is here, because we're going to get that infrastructure and supply phase where we'll be able to refresh the HQs anyway. So I hope that isn't too terribly confusing, but again, I think it's an important game mechanism to try to keep in mind how and when you get more supply and how and when you're going to refresh your HQs. And the whole reason you care between turns of who's fresh and who's not fresh is if you have an HQ that is fresh during your opponent's activity, that will allow you to do like a reaction movement. So when this will not happen for the South Koreans because they will have no fresh HQs, but ordinarily, when you're activating your own HQ and you're activating your units, after you've done your movement and before prepared and deliberate attacks, your opponent, if they have a fresh HQ, have an opportunity to spend that HQ, turn it to spent, activate some units, and move units forward, either to get in a position to support an attack on defense or some other thing that they may want to do, and maybe even try to cut supply lines and stuff like that. So when we look at what's the operational tempo of the game, keeping your HQs topped off is going to be really important, which then puts importance on that supply track, right? Which will then put importance on infrastructure bombing, which will reduce that supply, which may mean that fewer HQs are activated or can be activated or refreshed, and so on and so forth. So you can start to see the design of the game sort of display itself in terms of operationally succeeding at your objective goals, and then marshaling your forces the right way, managing your supply to ensure that the right forces are getting the supply they need to maintain the right level of activity. So it's kind of interesting, as I've studied the rules now and I'm getting ready to go, I'm like, okay, it's not, what I don't want to do is just be like, okay, and now we start attacking and we just move down. It's like, I really actually do need to think about how we're going to operate and if we can do so the most effective way possible. So yeah, okay, we're deep into intro territory, and I'm sure you guys actually want to see some gameplay, right? Right. So I'm going to put a pause here and get a drink of water, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take care of our communist North Korean strategic movement, and that will get us set up for the rest of the activation phase. Okay, so I've done strategic movement, and I'm sure that my folly is now complete, but we'll see how it works. Because I believe that HQs do not have a stacking problem, and I should probably double check that. Okay, HQs do not count against the stacking limit. Okay, good. So I've moved the units that were in the far west over to here. So the third HQ is now here, sort of providing some space to activate down this region. The goal, obviously, to work our way that way. We did move the first HQ here, also stacked. The limit that we had in terms of heading south in terms of strategic movement was we couldn't go farther than our furthest south unit from the beginning of the phase. So we don't get to cheat our way strategically, south. We had to sort of pick, a destination that was here and not within. Oh, you know what? My bad. I think I need to. You know what? I actually can't do that. You can't strategically move within 2 hexes of an opponent. So I guess these guys are 1 hex back here. You can see they're set up there. And then for the far eastern set of forces, right, I moved the HQ over here. And I don't really like where I'm situated, but I almost don't have a choice. And here's the reason why. I swear, there's going to be somebody who's going to point out a much more efficient setup for strategic movement, and I wish I could see it, but I don't want to spend 8 hours analyzing my opening moves. The important thing is these units that are way out east are within 10 movement points of this HQ. Now, you might say, well, how is that? Because there's all this mountain and stuff. The roads matter. So while these 2 guys easily within activation range of that HQ, the second HQ, those guys way out here actually are as well. And it comes down to using the roads. Now, a road movement cost, as long as you're moving along the road, is 1 hex, or I'm sorry, half a movement point. Sorry, for the road. And so if you were to count, right, we'd say it's half 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a half there to the HQ, and the same for this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 movement points to get to that HQ. So the road's really important. And so what I'm going to need to do, just to ensure that those guys can continue activating, is as I push through this area, I need to make sure that I get into these roadways so that we can use the roadways to count the line of communication and activation movement range to these units. That's going to be important. So the crossroads where the roads meet will be important as we traverse the way. And obviously, Seoul being kind of a all roads lead to Seoul kind of thing like that, that will obviously be important for a variety of reasons. Okay, so that is the communist strategic movement phase complete. No units are spent in this action, and so we're going to go to the actual activation phase. And so that you understand the breakdown here, there is a very specific order of operations that will occur called the activation sequence. The rulebook of 3.0 has it on page 8. So you can see here, basically every time you do an HQ activation, you're going to select that fresh HQ, you're going to flip it, and then as you do that, you're going to do the unit activation, cadre segment if it applies, initial movement and combat declaration. There's that reserve movement, so I see that as sort of the reaction movement, which we won't see this turn. There's a bonus movement that if you're done moving and there aren't any enemies around, you actually can move a little bit extra. So we may see that occur in a couple of places. And then we actually have the combat segment where your main combat types are going to occur. The only one that can happen that interrupts this whole sequence is a meeting engagement. So if we have an initial movement and we decide to declare a meeting engagement, that attack happens before anything else occurs. It's an immediate combat, but otherwise all the other combat types will occur during the combat segment, and then you sort of finish out the activities before you get to the end, and you decide, is the activated HQ that we activated all the way back here, is that HQ going to move, or is it going to refresh itself? And so you can kind of imagine we'll get to a point where instead of refreshing, we'll need to move units forward, but that will leave them in a spent state, right? So there's a cost, pro and con kind of thing, right? Do you move forward, but then they don't refresh, and you're gonna hope that I guess the way to look at it, maybe you only move the HQs forward when it gets to the end of the month, and you'll get that monthly refresh. That might be, when you decide to do it. So there'll be some, pitfalls, I think, as we get going, but we'll worry about that after that. So, okay. So in terms of the activation sequence, so what are we going to do? Let's make it easy on ourselves, and let's flip or spend our third HQ there, the one here, and let's activate this unit here. So we will flip this unit to its spent side, and he's not going to move. He's going to spend all of his movement, and this is the way it works, right? Is you spend movement to declare a type of attack. The type of attack that we want to declare is going to be a deliberate attack, which uses all of our movement. We're going to leave this guy unactivated for now, and we'll focus on that guy there. And let's see. Because this is a surprise effect, as the rules, the scenario information had stated, this first turn, our combats, we get to draw 3 different chits and pick which one we like most. So I'm going to grab from here the different chits for deliberate attack. And we'll just pull the 3, and we'll set them up over here for a moment, and we'll talk about the results and which ones we like versus which ones we don't like. All right, let's get zoomed in. I hope that my phone can focus. There we go. Okay, so we get to pick one of these 3, and once we've picked it, we'll set it on top of the target unit. So what are the different options? Well, you can see of these 3, they have a lot of different things in the upper corners or lower corners, all corners of the counter. The top left is going to be what die we roll and what bonus we get automatically for the die roll. So a D10 plus 2, a D10 plus 3, or a D6 plus 1. Well, clearly the better one there is a D10 plus 3, right? A D10 has higher values than a D6 ultimately, and that plus 3 is just default bonus to our die roll that we'll get. And I like the sound of that. That sounds pretty good, right? The support levels are in the lower left, and so the way it actually works is that a D is better than an A. So instead of it being like an A class where A is the best, it's A is the worst, B is the next worst, C, and then D is actually the best. So that 1d6 plus 1 actually has a D support readiness marker or value, which means we would get the most bang for our buck in terms of additional support, like from our artillery and from our tank support. Then the final thing that really matters is the bottom right, which is the advance. This is how many movement points we would get in an advance after combat to move forward with. So that counter on the right is 0. So we get a lower die, a smaller die, ultimately, and a worse bonus there. We don't get to advance, but we get better support. So what's the calculation here, right? I think ultimately the counter on the far left is totally obsolete by the center counter. So we can almost forget about this guy. I'll just chuck him back into the cup. I put him in the wrong cup. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that if we're going to use the D support, what kind of support would that really get us? So a D across tank and artillery, let's say we use tank or artillery, we don't want to use our air yet. Well, that's a -1 from our applicable support markers, and we're attacking a clear hex. Okay, so what does that ultimately mean? Well, that would mean for tank support, we would have 6 minus 1 is a 5. So it'd be +5 for tank support, and for artillery it'd be 3, so we'd get +3 artillery, +5 for tank, +8, plus the 1 is a +9. So a D6 plus 9, that's pretty good, right? D6 plus 9. If we use the left counter here and we have a C, well, for tank, that's the same. It's a -1, so we'd still have 5. But for artillery, it would be a 2. So instead, we would have it would work out to be a D10 plus 10, because we would have 5 tank, we would have 2 artillery. So that'd be a +7 plus the 3 we already get. So a D10 plus 10 or a D6 plus 9. In this case, this is definitely the better chit. So I'm going to put the D6 one back into the cup. And this is the one that we're going to end up using here, is this deliberate attack, like so. Right? Right. Okay. I will not do this for every combat, but I want to make sure this first one is as obvious as possible. So again, there you can look on page 11 of the rulebook. It will tell you what that support combat shit value is for tank and artillery. So again, D is the best, C is the next best. Because we're doing a deliberate attack, the different support values on the chits are going to be better than if you were doing a hastier attack that costs less movement points, There you're going to see more A's and B's, for instance. So the fact that we were right across from the enemy allows us to do a deliberate attack, which will tend to have better support values overall. Okay, so we've had our combat declaration segment. The reserve movement segment would be here, where the UN player could activate an HQ and try to do some response. But by the special rule of the scenario, all of the South Korean units, Republic of Korea units, are spent, including the HQs, so there is no reserve movement. There is no bonus movement segment because the only unit we activated can't move anymore. And now we actually have the combat segment, so we will take care of that. Now, we already know what we're going to roll as the communists. I am using my tank and armor support. We're going to have a D10 plus 10, which is pretty freaking great. And for the defender, it depends on what die they use, kind of depends on what they have. So let's see, if the defender is a fresh unit, it gets to use a D10. If it is a spent unit, it uses a D6. So essentially, we're going to be rolling a D10. Oh, I'm sorry, I threw off the focus. And a D6 for the UN player. And let's see, what else? Any die roll modifier for clear terrain? No. Does the UN player have any support options? No. So they really don't have much at all. And so I think that's it. I mean, that's really the bonuses. Now, you might ask, why aren't you using air support? Because I think air support would be overkill here. When you use air support, there's a chance that your unit that does the ground striking support, you don't just use the value on your support level, you actually are going to designate one of your air units in the ground strike box to use. There's a chance that they don't stay on station and they go back to the available aircraft box, and we don't want to do that yet. It's just totally overkill, right? Our artillery and our tanks are going to be enough, more than enough, to give us a pretty wide combat margin. Okay, so I think we're going to roll the dice. It's going to be a D6 plus nothing, effectively. I don't see any other bonuses that they can use. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that they have. Nope. And a D10 plus 10. Gee whiz, guys, I wonder who's going to win this fight. Okay. Here's the die result. So the communist rolled a 5, plus 10 is 15. The UN player rolled a 6. So 15 to 6, that's going to essentially be a loss for the UN. But because we rolled a natural 6, we actually get to place an elite unit marker on the unit in the combat. So I'm going to go ahead and find one of those chits, and I'm going to place it on this guy. Boop. He is an elite, apparently. Okay. Let me see what that's going to do. Okay. Subtract 1 from the maximum combat spread. So the way the combat spread works is, if we have a 15 to 6, the difference there is quite a lot, right? It's 9. But the game, to start with, maxes out as 5. So like I said, there's a bit of an overkill factor. So that overkill of 9 just shrinks down to a 5. But because of the elite unit status that unit just gained, we actually subtract 1 from the maximum combat spread. So even though the maximum combat spread would ordinarily be a 5, now it's a 4. So while we defeated the UN by 9 points, that shrinks to 5, further shrinks to 4, and now the UN player, the Republic of Korea, has to take 4 losses. So what can they do for the 4 losses? Well, what's the easiest thing to do here? I think what they probably want to do is it's pretty ugly. You can, for these losses, you can eliminate a unit, and that will take up all of the losses. But if we eliminate a unit, we're opening a pretty wide corridor to Seoul. So this is what I'll do. I'll pay a replacement point. You can pay a maximum of 1 replacement point for a combat. So we'll do that. So the South Korean replacements go from 4 to 3. And then for the other 3 points, we're going to retreat 3 hexes. And so we're going to do 1, let's see, 1, 2, 3, like so, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's 3 hexes. Because we retreated 3 hexes, we're going to place a routed marker, and the opponent draws from the cup. So we'll place the routed marker as soon as I find one. Okay, there it is. So it is a routed elite spent Republic of Korea unit. And now the North Korean player, the communist player, will draw from the Snafu Cup, and we'll get to place a marker, depending on what we draw, on the unit. So we will pull it, and we pull. Okay, so I pulled a red communist fuel shortage marker. So because that marker cannot apply to a UN unit, it just goes back into the cup. The snafu marker has no effect. Okay, so we've done that, and now, having defeated that guy, we get to advance 2 movement points, which becomes basically 1. Let's see, we're on a railroad now, so 1 and a half and 2, like so. I think that's the legal move I can make. I guess it doesn't really matter. It'd be like 1, 2 anyway. So the railroad doesn't help me as much as you think it might. So there you go. So that deliberate attack is over, and that activation is actually complete. So there we go. First combat, and what did we see? We saw, and it only took me 20 minutes or something to do it. The unit turned out to be an elite South Korean unit, but it was routed due to the overwhelming artillery and tank support of the prepared attack of the North Koreans, and is now retreating back towards Seoul. And we're done. We're done, at least with done with that. Okay, so now because we finished with that, we have a decision to make with the HQ that we used to activate. Do we want to move the HQ, in which case it can move 10 movement points, or if it doesn't move and has a line of communication, we can instead pay supply points to refresh the HQ. For the communist player, if the HQ is in North Korea, it costs 1 supply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pay 1 supply and refresh that HQ. We'll pay that on my supply track, so we are now down to 11 supply as the North Koreans. And let's see. I think we will. Do we want to activate him now? Yay or nay? I think we will. Why the heck not? Okay, so we'll go ahead and activate the HQ again. Only this time we're going to activate this unit, who we will flip, and we will have him move. Now, because this unit is going to have to move, what he can do is going to work a whole lot differently. So now that has been set to do movement, he only gets so many movement points. I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 movement points, which is not a lot. But if we use the roads, that's really what's going to be key here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, because we pay an extra 1 entering a Zoc. So now we have 4, we've spent 4 of our movement points. We can do a meeting engagement attack. So let's try that out. We're gonna try to do a meeting engagement against this unit and maybe see if we can whack it even more. And actually, come to think of it, I believe routed units don't have a, let's see, routed, cannot retreat in combat, cannot attack or provide combat support, has no Zoc, okay, and removes the marker, HQ activates it, okay, so this routed unit actually didn't have a Zoc, so we actually can do a hasty attack. So let's do that. So we're going to draw from a different cup for combat. And we get our choice of 3 again. And let's see. Well, there's an obvious choice here, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time discussing it. There's an obvious choice, and it is this one here. And there's no other movement that we can really do, so we're just going to get right into the combat, right? So what is that? That's a D6 plus 1 with a C rating for support. So I think what we'll likely see happen here is we will see, let's see, is this just, oh, he's in a town, interesting. Okay, so this is where it's going to be a little more difficult. And I think for the heck of it, we'll go ahead and we'll just roll with it and see what happens. So they're in a town. He's also behind a river, which means he's going to get a bonus +3. The defender will get a bonus +3 from terrain. 2, a +2 for the river, and a +1 for the town. So ordinarily, a routed unit has a lot of these sort of penalties, but I think even in this case, it's not considered combat support, it's just terrain bonuses. But they can't retreat. That's really interesting. Okay. All right, so what do we have here? A C support rating. So the North Koreans are looking at a C, which works out to be, for tanks, that will be 6 minus 1. Let's see, 6 minus 1. Oh, attacking across a river, we don't get tank support. Uh-oh. So now we start to see where the preponderance of force of the North Koreans might not be as good as we thought it was. So no tank support, that's a bummer. And then the C rating support value takes 2 off of our artillery. So we have 4 minus 2 is 2. In a town, we do still get 1 for 1. So we get a +2 for our artillery. Maybe here is where we'd want to use air support, but let's save it for now. Well, maybe this is a good time to do it. So if we only had a +2, and we have a +1 from there, we'd have a D6 +3. The defender would right now would have a D6 +3. I don't like those odds, right? I think the North Koreans need to maintain their momentum. So I wonder. Oh, but even the air support would only give us a 1, an extra +1, basically. Gosh, that's a tough call, man. Maybe I shouldn't have done this attack. Let's see what happens. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna see what goes on here. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and use our air support. So we have on our North Korean track a 4 air support. What we actually need to do is say we're going to have the support rating subtracted. So we have a 2 a 2 used. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay, so we have 4 support levels. A C rating for air readiness is a 2, so we'd end up with 2 maximum that we could use. And the unit that we have for this purpose actually provides 4, but let me see if we actually get the 2 or not. I'm gonna pause here. Okay, so after validating the air support, we're not going to use it. Here's why. The readiness rating isn't good enough. When we have a 4 air support, we minus the 2 for our readiness penalty. What we end up with is 2 left. We could still use our IL-10 Air Force to provide those 2 support points, but the cost of doing air support in a town is a 3 for 1, which means 2 doesn't even get us a +1. So we're left without air support at all. We're attacking too swiftly for our air to be properly allocated for this combat. So what do we do? what do we do now? I think we're going to have to move forward with the 2 combats, or the combats where we have a d6 each. So a d6 +3 for the attacker, and a d6 +3 as the defender, and we're just going to have to hope for the best. Okay. So this is the result. Now, because we have a... Oh, that's interesting. That's a bummer, man. That's a bummer for the UN because they rolled a natural 1. Oh man, that sucks. Okay, so because they rolled a 1, the elite unit becomes a poor unit. And this is going to have a pretty bad effect for the UN. So they're no longer elite, it's a poor unit. I guess the folks who represented the elite status have been killed in action, maybe, is maybe the way to look at that. So +3, so 7 to 4, but still there's the difference of 3 here, and that is less than the maximum loss, so it's still 3 losses that have to be taken by the UN, but here's the problem. Because it's a routed unit, they can't retreat. Cannot retreat in combat. So, what can they do? They're going to have 3... yikes, man. Oh, man. That's difficult. Oh, they can give up some victory points. That would be painful. But they can't retreat, so we can pay up to 2 victory points, and we can pay a replacement point and hold the line. I don't like the idea of giving up victory points, but if we eliminate a unit, it's going to be really hard to get him back. But victory points can come and go, so let's do this. We'll pay another replacement point, so that puts us in a pretty dangerous position. We're now down to 2 replacement points, and we'll give the North Korean player 2 victory points. That's really bad. But at least it slows them down over here. Gosh, yeah, that may simply be the best that we can really do. Yeah, okay. Yikes. Well, the South Koreans are only down to 2 replacement points now, so they're really running out of options. And we haven't even activated the rest of these units on the board yet. But this attack is over, and all of that is complete. So now, again, big question. What is the HQ going to do? What is the HQ going to do? It could move up, or it could refresh. If it refreshed, it would only be activating units over here. But we might need to do that in order to get past. Let's see, if we did 1 for 5, yeah, he won't get very far. I wanted to get next to Seoul, and I'm just not able to do it there. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to move him up to here, and I won't refresh him. And he'll get refreshed on the backside. Okay. Man, this video is going to be super long, guys. Here's what I'm going to do. Now that you guys have seen a relatively in-depth sort of decision-making process on these attacks, I will do the other activations off camera, because this video is going to be super long. I'm going to do the rest of these activations off camera, and when we come back, I will show you the end result. And what we would probably expect to see is, because we've drained so much of the North Korean manpower over here, the South Korean forces have been drained over here with replacements and everything else, that we're likely to see these other areas just collapse and a way opened to Seoul pretty easily, or very likely. At least that's what I'm thinking is going to happen. Yeah, okay, so we'll be back here in a second for you guys. Okay, so here we are after all of the actions here, and it's so hard to judge, like, did I do well? I really don't know. And now that I'm looking at it, I think I accidentally forgot to move and activate someone, or maybe I forgot to advance someone. That's a bummer. Shoot. Oh well, I think it'll be fine either way. So as you can see, what we ended up doing, I think I forgot to advance this guy. So, I mean, maybe he's like that, actually. He would have advanced a little bit with his movement. That's annoying that I forgot to do that. But you can see we got 1 unit into Seoul, and we're actually sitting on top of that objective marker. We are kind of causing problems for this guy over here. He doesn't have very many places to go. We're a little bit bunched up outside of Seoul there, but elsewhere, because we had drained so much of the resources, we functionally eliminated 2 Republic of Korea units. They are off in the replacements box. Basically, the combat loss margin was so large that they really couldn't do anything without giving up a bunch of victory points, and so they eliminated themselves. The South Koreans are down to 0 replacement points. They do have 1 elite unit that got pushed back over here, but we now have on the board 2 guards units. You can see 1 has pushed this far down due to his advancing down the road. As I'm playing through, I will say it seems like the roads are super important. Obviously, they're important for lines of communication and making all of that work. But the activation is based on movement points, and roads and railroads make that much, much easier. That even HQs that are pretty far behind, as long as you're using a road to activate units, that helps a heck of a lot. And when you advance after combat, for instance, with 3 movement points, that's functionally 6 hexes when using a road, at least if I'm playing this right, and I think I am. So we've certainly made an advance. I chose to lock this guy up a little bit rather than just go down the road. That might be the error that I make, because they maybe could have gotten down, like down to here or something, or beyond. I'm not sure. We did take one of the supply ports, so you can see right there, we took one of them. So we are 1/4 of the way to victory, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. But that's now with every North Korean unit exhausted and spent. Now, I did look, and so there was no functional reason for me to spend my supply to refresh the HQs now, because once it gets to the UN, they're not going to be able to do anything. I'm pretty certain. Like, they don't. I don't think they can actually take any operations. I'll have to look at it and see kind of what our options are. But I don't think that the South Koreans can really do much to change the game situation, and so I think it was okay to leave these guys. Um, well, I don't know. Maybe I should have left somebody. Well, let's see what happens. Because here's the thing. I guess in every case, if I had just spent out the supply, I'm down to 7 supply. If I spend down to 4 and said, well, I just kept every HQ activated except for him, because he moved. I don't think anybody else moved. I think that would, yeah, we'd be at 5 supply, and yeah, I guess that would be it, right? I'm sorry if I'm rambling, guys. I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, what's the right move here, because these HQs down here didn't move. I would have spent a supply point to refresh them. I don't expect to have to spend a whole lot of supply during the UN activation turn, but we could react or something if we wanted to. That would be, I guess, the sole reason why we would do that. But we can't do that here because we moved that HQ, and we moved him in such a way that he's going to continue to provide activation capability out there on the east part of the peninsula. So, yeah, I don't know. We still have 5 supply, which will be enough to activate our HQs. And then I left the HQs above the border because I did look ahead, and during the monthly phase, if those HQs are in North Korea and have a line of communication, they refresh for free. So, it's sort of like that's how you can look to help conserve some supply points by waiting until the next monthly turn. It just happens to be that this month is a short month for the game, and we can finagle it any which way we want. Okay, so the communist activation phase is done, and then we look at the communications phase. Everybody, I am pretty certain, is good to go for communications, and now we have a refresh phase. So we refresh our combat units, but not HQs, by flipping encounters from spent to their fresh side. So everybody here just becomes back, hunky-dory, fresh. But again, not the HQs. And we'll get these guys over here. All right. Okay, so all those guys are turned to fresh. And then we have the UN strategic stuff. So I'm going to put a pause here, and we will try to figure out what we can do as the UN player this turn. I don't think there's a whole lot, but I do think it's a good question to understand, like, what could we have done anything better as the North Koreans here? I mean, I think we beat back the UN to the point where they don't have a whole lot of options, and we will probably be able to maneuver close to the Pusan perimeter because of, again, the road network making movement very easy. We should be able to be flying down the highway, getting down that direction, right? I think that's certainly feasible. I don't think we need to worry too much about being able to do that. But I'm not sure. So, okay, I'm going to put a break here, guys. This video is going to end up being super long. I am so sorry, but we'll try to do as much off camera as I can. Okay, you know what? I should have double checked the rules. because all the South Korean forces, the UN forces, are all spent, everything on the board is spent, they can't do any strategic movement and they can't do any UN activations. So those next steps of the sequence of play actually really don't apply. They can't do any of those things, W11 or W12, which puts us in the reset phase already. So do we want to voluntarily eliminate any units? I don't think that's in the best interest of either player at this point. And let's see, victory check. Okay, so here is where we're going to play sort of the victory point mini game and figure out what we can do. So the player can do one thing, I think, for the North Koreans, the communists. They're going to reveal all friendly objective markers that are adjacent to at least one friendly unit. This one here in Seoul is technically adjacent, and it's revealed to be one victory point. Not great. You would think there'd be more, but it's randomly drawn, so there you go. And then the UN player is going to do something. I think what they will do is they will opt to kick out this objective marker and return it to the pool. And this was a one victory point marker. So they're just removing that as their one option. And the reason they can do that is the choice is remove an enemy objective marker that has a friendly unit in the same hex, place the marker back in the pool. Okay. So in terms of the objectives, the North Koreans are revealing the one in Seoul because they're on it. So they want to see, what do they get for controlling it? At the end of next turn, the weekly phase turn, they'll probably want to grab a victory point to seize it and own it, and get some victory points for that. The South Koreans are doing what they can to remove those VP markers because they don't want to have the North Koreans get those victory points, right? That seems like a straightforward thing to do. And then the time phase, which is we're going to go to July, and that's it. Okay, we did it, guys. We did it. Turn 1 is complete. And where do we stand? The communists have 3 victory points picked up via combats for the most part. That might be giving up too many because all it takes is 21 to win the game. But we should see that balance out with the UN player also getting victory points on the counterattack. The South Koreans are out of replacement points, but we'll likely see that get pumped back up a little bit with the monthly reinforcements and everything else coming in. The communists had 5 supply points left over, but that won't really matter. And they ended up not taking any losses at all. They didn't lose any of their support. They didn't lose any of their... they didn't lose any replacements. No support, no replacements. It was all cheese and crackers for the North Koreans as they came across the border. So I really have no idea how good this was. Maybe, Adam, if you're watching, let me know what I did wrong or what you think, or how well I'm doing. I think this breakthrough here was important. We have a nice command over some of the main roadways, so we can take Seoul, we can keep pushing down the continent. That seems to be good, but we got slowed down over here because I didn't set things up so that I could keep that unit from retreating. I did not create an encirclement, and so that guy got to bleed off some losses by retreating, and maybe I got choked up there. Maybe that's the one failure on my part. I don't know. But okay, guys, that was it. Sorry, this video is super long. We'll see you in the next one for turn 2, July 1950, week 1. Take care. Keep on game until then.